Hi everyone, in this video we're going to talk about methods. Basically, methods are a sequence of instructions, and remember that Java is an object-oriented programming language. So the black boxes from which a program is created are called objects, and objects have methods associated with it. You are going to manipulate objects by calling their methods. So let's look into what a method actually is. First, let's talk about the learning objectives that are covered. First of all, we need to understand what methods are in order to be able to adhere to certain standards according to documentation and the expectation for the way that you should write your Java programs. And then 21 is more specifically about methods, which is explaining static methods. We'll talk about the syntax, how to write a static method, parameters, method headers, and then you should be able to write it. You should be able to trace methods that are already given to you. And then finally, you should know what return values are. So far with coding, you can think about it as a sequential structure, just going like line by line, step by step. We perform these actions in order. Create A, calculate B, output B. And there really hasn't been very much branching or skipping of any task, except with maybe if-else statements. And so that's all we've done. But we can do things that are more complicated by using method structures. So a method allows you to write tiny little programs within your program that might help you to make things easier to manage and kind of make things modular. So if you're saying that this part of the program should do this, and you can work logically on other parts of your program. So that's what we call a method. It'll calculate something and it will return it to you. So let's say we have this thing where we're going to create A, create B, and then add them together. You could go in order, create A, create B, and then add them together. But instead, when you reach the adding portion, so I have like C is equal to adding of A and B, we can have our program call to some other portion of the code. And now this method that we call add is given two parameters A and B, which they're associated to X and Y in the method, and it's going to add them together. Now, these parameters may have the same names as the variables, but it's the order that's going to matter. Great, so it's going to take that total, it's going to add it together, and it's going to return it, and then that'll send the total value back to C. And so now the code can output C. This is obviously like kind of a simplified example because adding is one of the primitive operators, but you can put pretty complicated stuff inside your method. And we'll move on. Some things I want to point out. A method has what's called a return. I mentioned that the return statement will send the total value back to C. It's so that C is assigned whatever the output of the add is. It's not the same thing as printing. Now, finally, because the value of A plus B is saved in C, we can do more calculations. So we need to ensure basically that we have the correct return value if we're going to set things equal using the assignment operator. So let's break down the method structure some more. This is just the syntax for methods. So basically there's something called visibility, which states where else in the program you can use this particular method. So a word like public tells you that it can be used anywhere. And we've seen that before with the main method, public static void main. So then you will have what's called the return data type. That states what data type the method will create as its output. So the add example should have a return type of probably int. If you're adding two numbers together, maybe double. And so it would say int right there. On the other hand, public static void main has no return type. It's what's called void, so it doesn't return anything. Then you're going to name your method whatever you want. So add is a pretty descriptive name for what I was doing earlier. There's other things that you might be doing, so give it a descriptive name. And then the method is going to take in parameters. So basically, the parameters will tell you the type, and then we'll have like a list of how many we expect to have. So with that add example, I had add A and B, so it took in two parameters, and probably their data type was, they were both ints. And then inside the curly braces, you're just going to have the logic of what the method actually does. And then basically, if the method has a type to return, so int, double, boolean, char, it will return that value of that type. And there are some methods which are void and they may not return anything. Good. Now, what you can do, as I showed with the add example, is you can set a new variable which has the same type, and you can have that call the method from memory by its name and give it the arguments. So those would be arguments that are found later on or somewhere else in the code. So where I had the method that took in, it was like add x, y, c was equal to add a, b, which replaced those variables with those values and then actually did that operation on them. And then again, I'll point out the parameter names are not going to be the same. It's the order that tells you which value goes where. Something for like adding a plus b, order doesn't matter, but there are going to be different methods where the order matters, of course. Now, in terms of the number of parameters a method can take, it could be 0. So something like the random method that we've seen before, it already knows what it's going to do. It's just going to get a random number between 0 and 1, so it doesn't need to take any parameters. On the other hand, maybe you want to take square root, and you need one number to be able to take the square root of it. And then there are basically no limit to the number of parameters you can take in. You just have to write all of them out. System.out.printf can take in multiple things after the string that you're formatting for however many variables you're taking. And so that actually has like a different number that you can set when you call system.out.printf. I do want to talk about the difference between return and the parameter data types. They don't have to be the same type. Okay, so that's just a little like caveat for you. Here's an example. Let's say that I'm going to write a method that will return a boolean, and it takes in two ints and will return whether I1 is greater than I2. So here, and you can do this in one step, I just say return I1 is greater than I2, which will either be true or false. So even though the input parameters were two ints, the return is just going to be a boolean. Like here's just another example. Let's say that I have a method, I want to return an int, and it takes in a boolean. So there's only two values that a boolean could be. It could be true or it could be false. And basically, if b, return 5, otherwise return 0. So this is something that returns 5 if I put in true, and otherwise returns 0. Here's a little question for you. Is there a more succinct way to write this particular piece of code with the if statements? Maybe something else. Good. So I'll just walk through a little practice problem for you, just to give you basically more examples. So you can definitely When you see the code, we can pause the video and you can work on this on your own, just to get used to things, but I'll explain everything. So here's an example that has you format money. So I have this class here called format currency, and now I have this method, public static string format money double total. And what you can see here, previously we've talked about I always needed you to start with main, but now it's fine that I have this method first. And then only down here I have the main method. Cool. So let's see what this particular method does. You should write comments. So you can say basically something like, oh, this takes in a double, and it will output the format of that money with 2 decimal points after, which is the way that we normally look at currency. Great. And so we can now do this thing called formatting of the string. So this is something we have not talked about before, but we already know strings have methods associated to them. So here's string format, and then you can actually call this thing called string.format, which is like system.out.printf, but it's going to format my money in terms of having the $sign in front of it and then the 2 decimal points. So it works a lot like printf, only now it's a return type, not just a print. Cool. And then looking at the main method, here's just maybe like $5.55 that I want it to have. And so it'll print out the total. And now I can just call format money and put in that value 5.55, which is a double. And it will tell me that that's 5.55. It'll have the $sign in front of it. And then the other part that it's going to print out, let's do another example. Total 5.55 plus, I'm going to multiply my amount by 0.07. So this could imagine this being like a 7% sales tax. And I can format the money again. And this time I'm going to get 5.94. So you can actually see this down here. That's going to print out the correct amount based on what I want that return value for format money to be. So let's just walk through the parts of this. Again, the method takes in the parameter of a double, and then those are passed to the method for processing. So basically main is like sending this example total to the method to do something to it. As I've pointed out before, the parameter does not have to have the same name as the value that's passed. It's called total inside the declaration of the method, but the variable that I'm using inside my main method is called example total. Let's look at a slightly different version of this example, where now we're going to have 2 parameters. I'm going to have the total and then the tax. So we had the formatting stays the same, and basically if you go in to a store and you buy something and it's costs however much, you're also going to pay a sales tax on it. So you're going to have your total plus the total times the percentage of tax. And I'm just going to have this method return the total amount that you will pay. So for example, again, if you are going to go into, I don't know, a coffee shop or something like that and pay $5.55 for your, I don't know, drip coffee, is it really expensive? I can have the sales tax be 7%, and it will return to you $5.94. On the other hand, let's say we're buying the same coffee in a different state that has slightly higher sales tax, maybe it's 8%. In that case, then your total would be $5.99. Right, so this is really nice because by putting another parameter into my method, I am able to change that value and work with different amounts of sales tax right away. So it's no longer hard-coded in. So in general, one nice thing about doing methods is that you can make your code more modular, and you can break things up into logical pieces. That's going to help you with system testing later on. I just want to point out to you that in this method, in all methods, the variables of each data type needs to be specified. So here I had double total and double tax. They are both doubles in this case, and I needed to write the word double in there. Then when I called the code inside my main method, I needed to ensure that this example total that I have is a double, and also that this tax that I have is a double. Good. Let's just break things down a little bit more. The variables that you create inside a block of code only exist inside that block of code. That's kind of what the curly braces mean. So if you have a thing called balance inside your main method, which I have here, then that's what balance is in that area of the code. And here I have something else, which is this just this method called compound interest that takes in a parameter called balance. This is not the same balance that is in the main method. It has a different scope. So I mentioned that you could use the same parameter names, although I think sometimes this can be quite confusing. I think it helps to try to name things differently wherever possible. Now, I've mentioned before that the methods need to have some sort of return type, but if they don't return anything, they can be void. So you need to put in a return data type, but you could just say that it's void, which means it returns nothing. For example, public static void print sum just prints out the sum of two values. So in this case, there is nothing in the code that requires it to return some value because all we want it to do is print. Now, when would you want to use void versus when would you want to return a value? In general, you use a void type when you want the method to just perform some action, and a value type if you actually want the method to answer a question. Some examples for that could be, let's say you have an object like a radio and you want it to lower its volume. That could be something, or you could change the channel, or you could set an alarm. And so that actually changes the data associated with a radio object. On the other hand, let's say that you want the radio, maybe your like little home device, you want it to give you some prices of the current stock. So maybe you have a double get price, and then you can put in the current stock code in there to get the price of it. You could have it do a Google search and return the results of your query. And let's say you set the alarm earlier to be set to 7 a.m. to wake you up, but only Monday through Friday, maybe something like that. And now you want to remind yourself, what time did I set it for? It'll return to you that wake up time. This might still feel a bit abstract, but this is the general idea of when you want to use void versus a return type. So let me just give you the kind of the big picture of what methods are for in Java. They are sequences of instructions that access the data of an object. So everything inside Java is going to be an object, and an object has things that it is, data that's associated with it, and things that it can do, which are the methods. So the methods are the instructions that give what those actions are. So basically, you manipulate objects by calling their methods. And a class, by the way, here's some new vocabulary, is a set of objects with the same behavior. And that class is going to tell you what the legal methods for that object are. So for example, a string let's say hello, you can't do greeting.println because println is not associated to a string. You can, however, ask for greeting.length because length is a method that's associated with the class string, so a string object can call it and it will return something to you. So basically that public interface specifies what you can do with the objects of a class. Okay, so that's all I have for you today with methods, and we're starting to relate them to objects as well. So yeah, thanks for watching.